You're listening to the Jōrni Podcast. What do you do when the life you knew is gone and the one that follows is even harder? Stay with us for a deeply personal story of survival. This episode contains adult subject matter and some listeners may be triggered by this content. Listener discretion is advised. Hi, I'm Petra Brunbauer, and with decades of experience with sadness, pain, anxiety, and stress, I finally figured out how to leave all that behind. And this podcast shows you how to break free permanently so you can reclaim your sanity and find the self-esteem and energy to go after the life you desire. With real talk about mental health, holistic healing, and the tough journey of coming out the other end. This is the Jōrni Podcast. Welcome to today's episode. In this episode, we step into an intimate conversation about what it means to find healing and strength after life's most challenging experiences. Our guest opens up about navigating profound loss, facing pivotal decisions, and uncovering resilience in the unexpected turns her life has taken. Julie Barth, author of Notes from a Blackberry, From Blackberries to Thorns, and upcoming From Thorns to Blossoms, is a mother to 6 children and a professional writer whose life experiences transcend the boundaries of fiction. Her journey, marked by love, loss, and an unwavering spirit, lends authenticity to her writing. Julie's narrative style is deeply rooted in her belief that life's true essence is discovered in its most challenging moments. Her work reflects a dedication to finding joy and meaning in every experience, inspiring readers to embrace their own journeys with courage and gratitude. Julie Barth is also the CEO and founder of the Colin James Barth Outreach, a non-for-profit dedicated to helping women-led households with the resources and aid necessary to find security and stability in times of crisis. Her mission is to use her experiences as caregiver, special needs parent, and trauma survivor to encourage women in similar situations to think resourcefully and always protect themselves without stigma or feelings of selfishness. Let's meet Julie Barth. Hi, Julie. It's so great to have you on the podcast today. I've been looking forward to getting to chat with you because healing and thriving is such an important topic, and I feel like you have a very big personal story to tell our listeners as well and to share with them what has been happening with you and in your life. I very much look forward to hearing about that and discussing that. Welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be on, so I appreciate you telling my story.
Yeah, thank you so much for taking this time. And I really appreciate it when my guests feel like they can be vulnerable and authentic and share their personal stories on the podcast. I feel like listeners are really looking to connect with these personal stories because so many things happen in this world. And it's sometimes really nice to hear that others are going through similar things or things that they can relate to. So thank you for that. And with that, would you like to share a little bit about yourself and your story? Maybe sort of an overview to give our listeners an idea of what we will be talking about and also to get to know you a little bit as well.
Okay, so my name is Julie Barth, and I am originally from Chicago. I met my first husband there. We were childhood sweethearts and eventually ended up meeting back after college. And we had our first son, moved to the suburbs, and everything was going really well. And then we had my second daughter. So my daughter, right from the start, things just kind of went downhill really, really quickly. And at the end of it, we found out that she had something called primordial dwarfism. So right as we were finishing up with that, making her, it was a really long recovery system. I think she had over 40 surgeries. Right as we were coming off of that, we had 2 more children. Life got semi back to normal, whatever that looked like. And he was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. So we had children from 10 to, at that point, 6 months. And we're fortunate. We were told that he had 2 weeks to live, that he should go home and say goodbye to his children. And fortunately, he didn't. We had 16 months with him. They were both a blessing, and some parts of them are a curse. And during that time, I wrote about my daughter, Tatum, who has the primordial dwarfism, because we were just coming off of that entire situation. It was like 3 years of traveling and surgeries. And I would go down to chemo with him on Tuesdays. And I started writing about her resilience, all that happened with her. And it kind of necessarily flowed into what was happening real time with him. So it sat on my laptop for about 12 years. I never had any, there was never, I didn't write it for the purpose of releasing it into the world, but I went into a second situation in my life, and it was a decade of emotional abuse. And coming out of that, I reminded myself that I had made a promise to Colin in his final days. That was my first husband's name, that all that he went through, and it was unimaginable that something good would come out of it. So in the healing process of coming off of the decade with children and trying to unpack, 2 decades really, if not three, of just one thing after another and exhaling, I decided that I was going to start a nonprofit for women-led households that reach crisis. So that's kind of the synopsis of me and my story.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I almost just want to give you a moment to breathe and to take a breath. It feels like there is so much that has happened in the last decade plus in your life and also with your children, your family, a lot of loss, a lot of things you had to cope with on your own at some point. And that in itself, I'm kind of wondering, first, you lose your first husband, which in itself must have been so devastating and so much grief and pain that you were going through, especially joining him on that journey of chemo and the healing. How do you stay resilient in the face of that? How do you come out the other end and then going into a relationship that was abusive as well, coming out of that? And still, you're here, you're sharing your story, and by the sounds of it, you're also connecting with your children over the story that happened to your family. How do you come out the other end, and what gave you that strength to keep going and to share your story after that happened?
I think truly that it was my kids that kept me going. When you're a caregiver to someone and you've got little people looking to you to make everything okay. It's people always ask me, like, how'd you do it? How do you keep doing it? And I remember thinking, well, how do you not? There was never a question in my head like, well, I don't feel like doing this today, or I'm just going to stop. But in spite of all of that, because I do feel like you do keep going, I was able to also enjoy, the times that I could kind of separate from myself. And Colin was sick, I would take the little kids downstairs and just kind of like cuddle in. And I always, I maybe because I watched the fragility of life through Tatum or through Colin, I always felt like, no matter what the global situation of my life is, of the overwhelming nature, I tried not to think of, oh my gosh, I have all of this stuff, and feeling like you can get stuck in fear and panic. So I think that I just tried to put that aside in the moment and think, okay, I will tackle this enormous, snowball later. But for right now, I have to focus on being present for my children. So it did pick me out of just feeling like everything was lost and there was nowhere to go with it. And life was just about survival, for their sake, for my sake, whichever it was, or probably both. I saw it as, none of us are ever guaranteed, anything in life. We don't know if we're going to be here next, in the next 5 minutes, knock on wood. But if you constantly look at the big picture of it and let all of the things that can come at you in life bog you down, then you really can't enjoy life. And, if we're not here to enjoy it, then that's a very meaningless way to live. And I kind of feel like we're all here for a reason. We have a purpose. And I think I just try to find the goodness in every day that I'm here. And I don't mean to sound, I know that a big phrase right now is toxic positivity, and that's not what I'm not sugarcoating anything. I'm just saying that in every situation. You have to be present in it and look around and think, okay, what can I take out of this? What can I do to control what I can control? And how can I take the best of it so that it doesn't get me stuck in, and feeling like the worst is always going to come, because unfortunately, no one gets out of life without, horrible situations and struggles. And the more I talk to people, the more I understand, like, you can feel like you are the only person, especially when you continue to have one thing after another. But, everybody has one thing after another. It's all in degrees, and it's all in the way we perceive them, and it's all in the way that we tackle them. So my, special needs child, cancer, caregivers, those were my struggles, but they're not any more serious than somebody who's dealing with, small or depression or, relationship. Everything is all in your experience. So it is just about trying to take a deep breath and figure out how you can find joy in what you have right now and kind of deal with what you have to in the moment rather than the enormity of how do I get out of this right now.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. And I'm wondering if your experiences and maybe even the first experience with a special needs child and caring for her, does that crystallize things in your life of what your actual priorities are? I feel like a lot of us, we just kind of live and what comes. And we aren't really forced to think about the things that are really important to us unless something bad happens in our lives and we sit down and we go, oh, my family is really important to me, or I really should spend more time with them because I don't know how much time I have. Did you come to a point in any of this where that really sort of crystallized to you what was important in your life?
I think that Tatum definitely was the catalyst to me seeing this world in a different way. And, I did realize through her because, I would take her in, she had a cough, and the next thing you know, she was flatlining. So it was such a roller coaster ride. But I think more what she taught me is that, when you have a special needs child, you deal with, like, you have to let go of these feelings because regardless, you try and have this brave front when people stare at your child or they gawk at your child, or the pity that you see in everybody's eyes. It's very hard to go everywhere and have people pity you, because in my head I was always like, yeah, you're seeing, this child and all of her needs and all of the sadness involved. But what you're not seeing is the joy that she's bringing to everyone around her in the smaller moments. So I think that's what it changed my perspective of how we pity people, or how we're happy we're not them. And I'm sure I know that I've been that person that in my book, I talk about how I always wanted a normal life. And I kind of was always, well, at least we're not the Barth, or at least I'm not Julie Barth. And that was hard to come to terms with, that everybody was like, well, at least I'm not her, because there was a part of me that, still was like, I'm enjoying my life, like it might look sad from the outside, and I'm sure it is, but I, could find the good in it. So I think that's, stop worrying about being normal, stop worrying about your appearances and what other people think or how you look from the outside. Because if you are happy in your own life and you can find joy, and you know what your child's capable of and that you're enjoying it, like, don't let other people, kind of dictate by their impression of you who you really are. And I think that was more the lesson I learned through all of it. Like, go ahead, pity me, go ahead, stare. I understand it. I understand. And I would feel sorry for someone in my shoes, but realizing that I didn't feel sorry for myself was a powerful thing.
Yeah, I'm hearing a little bit of a difference between pity and compassion for someone, and that there are many nuances, it seems, in those steps on how we can be present with someone that we might feel like we need to pity, but really we can just give compassion or be there for them, be by their side, or even just give our presence because there's not much else that we might be able to do in that moment. So yeah, that's really great actually to tell our listeners about that, because some of them might be in situations where they're thinking, oh, I'm glad I'm not that person because of what's going on in their lives. So to just give that presence or that compassion and maybe hold the pity and sense into what is happening with them in the first place. So yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. And I think also it's about, like, don't feel uncomfortable, because when other people feel uncomfortable with you, then you feel uncomfortable. And then it almost becomes like those people don't want to be around as much because they feel so uncomfortable in the situation. And then you start, having that distance between you. And it's almost like you become a club of people who you can't talk to everybody because they just want to hear fine, and you can't just say fine. So, not just compassion, but more like try and remember that they're still the same people. They still want to laugh. They still want to joke. My humor was still there. And when I would say things off color, because that's who I am, it made people uncomfortable. And I understood that. But I think more just if I'm okay with it, I want you to be okay with it. And that's kind of what the laughter and the joking is about. So that uncomfortableness, I think, is one of the hardest things.
Yeah. I wonder if that also comes from people not being familiar or not understanding exactly what you're going through. They may have not lost a loved one in that way, or may not be caring for a special needs child and or going through an abusive relationship. So there could be that unknown that becomes very uncomfortable because they don't know what they're dealing with and what's appropriate and not appropriate in those situations. So yeah, that's very enlightening actually that you're explaining that for people who are trying to be there for their loved ones in those situations, which I can imagine can be quite difficult on both parts as you're explaining. So probably good to just open up the communication and talk about that so that you kind of take that elephant out of the room and you can reconnect. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, how was that for you when you were caring for a special needs child and at the same time you received a diagnosis that your loved one was terminally ill? I feel like there are a lot of challenges going on in that, not just emotionally, but also balancing caring for two loved ones at the same time, who I imagine both had great needs, and not just medical needs, but also emotional and logistical. As you said, doing chemo and caring for the surgeries for your daughter. How did you find ways to care for yourself in those moments? And was there anything that helped you sort of recharge your own batteries at times? Because I imagine that for you would have been extremely draining to be caring for two people at the same time.
I don't really, the mind has an excellent way of just kind of just doing. I think I lived many years just on autopilot. You know, it's like I just put out fires wherever they were. And again, I tried not to think of the overwhelming nature of things. I do remember, and part of the reason why I speak to people and why I'm, out promoting my books is because I had a very hard time accepting help. When you get sick, the first thing people do is they come to you and they say, "What can I do? What can I do?" And you're so overwhelmed that you don't even know. And it's almost like somebody asking you is just as stressful as not having help. So I remember telling people like, "Oh, I'm fine," or not coming up with things and feeling like, "Oh, I don't want to bother them anyway." And there's also a part of you that feels like if you let one thing go or you start delegating, all the house of cards are going to fall because you'll just lose control of the entire situation. But when you do that, you tend to isolate and you just like get hyper focused and you start forgetting that you're actually a person. You almost feel like you're like a robot, just like getting people here. And I spent probably 2 years of just trying to get to the end of the day. And, I did take time for me to go running. That was probably the only solace that I found. But I do think that had I let people in a little bit more, I think that it would have maybe been a little bit more manageable. And, if I let one person in, then it probably would have been more manageable to let two people in. For those people out there that are dealing with somebody who's going through trauma, a loved one or a friend, it's so nice to say like, what can I do? But if they're stonewalling you and you're watching them stumble, I think just saying to them, not giving them an option like, "Hey, I'm going to the grocery store, I'm getting you something, so what do you need?" Or, "Hey, I'm going to pick your kids up from school today." Because when someone doesn't give you a choice and they just say, "Hey, I'm coming to do laundry today," you're not bothering them. I completely can tell you, you are not bothering them. And when you just step in and show up and just do, it is like, I can't tell you how much it takes something, even if it's the slightest thing, it takes something off of your plate. The guilt disappears because you're not really asking, and you're not even, they're not giving you the option to say no. So I think a lot of it, there's so much guilt involved in asking people to do things, or you almost feel indebted when people step in. But I think if those barriers were let go and you just said, I'm just doing this on both ends, I think I would have been like, okay, well, I can't stop you and thank you. And things would, I think it would have been easier for people just to say, I'm dropping off lunch, I'm picking up your kids, because you know what these people need. You don't need to ask them. You can just look around, take one burden off there, just for a day. Those little moments mean so incredibly much that you don't have a clue, but you feel good, they feel good. It's like just a goodness chain on both sides. So
That's really good to know that it would actually feel helpful if people just stepped up and did something, because I feel like this is another one of those moments where the people on the outside might feel really awkward about just not wanting to interrupt or impose on you, or disrupt what's going on in your life because you're already dealing with so much. And again, it creates this awkward situation. Well, should I come over? Is that even appropriate? Or will I just be coming into the middle of a situation where I'm absolutely not welcome? So that's a really good thing for our listeners to know, is that if you see someone struggling, just step in and do a little thing for them. And if they have children, you already probably know what to do. Pick them up, feed them. There's always laundry. I imagine that's a huge thing, is keeping up with the cleaning when you're busy with other things. So maybe even just doing the laundry or the dishes, or some kind of helpful gesture. So that's really great to know that that would have felt helpful to you and that would have been accepted on your end as well. Thank you for sharing that. And after your husband passed, I imagine that there was a bit of a void, because I feel like when there are a lot of intense emotions and then that comes to an end, there's almost a space that is no longer filled. It's like a hole or an abyss. And how did you manage the grief that came when he passed and you were sort of left with your children, and your life was still there, and it was still continuing, but your loved one was no longer there, and it was a very different situation, and you now had to make sense of that and move forward and hold your family together, and potentially, I don't know if you were the breadwinner or if your husband was the breadwinner, that the situation very much changed with that. How did you move through that grief? And was there anything that was helpful or healing to you in those moments as you were trying to make sense of that after he passed away?
I think a lot of, what I've been speaking about is I did kind of close myself off to everyone, and I wanted everybody to like believe that everything was fine. Don't look here, because I had a sense that people didn't want to hear. You don't want to walk around like a doom and gloom all the time, but yet you're living doom and gloom. So you kind of feel like you're dancing for everybody else. Like don't look over here. So I did a lot of saying I'm fine, everything's fine, everything's fine. But as much as I was trying to pretend that everything was fine, obviously nothing was fine. I had these four small children. Colin had been he was, my first kiss in sixth grade. And there was never a time in my life when I don't remember him being there. So it was, I didn't just lose Colin, I lost Julie Barth, because I no longer knew who I was without him. I didn't have the support. We'd fought so hard to get Tatum to where she was that we were like in a, benefit. We were unstoppable. And then suddenly it was just me. So a lot of it was, I looked around and I didn't want to talk about the grief. I didn't want to sit in it. I just wanted to pack it up, pack it away, move forward. And I found that a lot of people who were so sad, they had lost Colin. I couldn't be in their sadness. So, everyone in the town knew us and they were so incredibly supportive. They gave us fundraisers, and everybody just came out. But that was also overwhelming to me because if I would go to the grocery store, people would be like, oh, my son would say like, Mom, why do you make everyone cry? And yeah, it's just this weird, you just want to disappear, but at the same time, you understand that you can't, and everybody's looking to you with their grief, and you're trying to process, they see you and all they see is a loss. So at a certain point, I think that I didn't want to process it. I just wanted to back it up, move it away. And I think that's what led to my second relationship. And another reason why, I'm talking about all of these complex feelings is because I met somebody who didn't care how I felt. He didn't want me to talk about it. He was just fine in me pretending that it was not going on, and picking up and moving away from my family and my friends. And so I took the opportunity. I just literally picked my children up, decided I was going to move on with a new life and not acknowledge anything that went before. And we did. We all packed up and I left my family and moved to a completely different state and kind of just cut everybody off. And, that led to an entire decade of feeling very lonely. And oddly enough, I felt like everyone left me, which is, I think kind of what I was told, when really I kind of just left everyone and everything in my past because I couldn't deal with it.
So, in that second relationship, what was the turning point for you? At which point did you think that something might be off or that you no longer wanted or could continue that relationship? Did that sort of creep in slowly and over the decade, or was there a specific thing that happened where you said, "Oh, I can't do this any longer and we need to get out of here"? Or how did that happen for you?
I think right out the gate, because everyone always said, like, what were the warning signs? I knew from the get go, we all had, I always say, like, a house has a house alarm, a car has a car alarm. Like, our brains have an alarm that alert us, like, something is not right here. But I think I desperately just needed not to be me. And here was some person who was willing to, go away with me. And I created an entire scenario of who we were as a couple, who he was as a person. And I was so committed to it and married to it that regardless of what was really in front of me, I was trying to make it fit into what my narrative needed to be, into the family that I was going to hold together, into my second chance at love. And it took me many years. I made a lot of excuses. I excused a lot of things. And it went from, kind of, it was always just like, something's not right here. Or, he would tell me one thing and I'd be like, that doesn't sound right. But, we'll just keep going with it. And the further it went along, the nastier it had to be to get me to trigger. And, I just got to a point where every day was just a day to try and, get to the end. I couldn't get out of bed without aches and pains. And I knew something was wrong. I knew it was us, but I thought it was me. So, I engaged in counseling. I tried to get both of us in counseling, but the problem with an emotionally abusive partner is that they don't want to go to counseling because they don't want it fixed. And for someone who I'm such a fixer, I tried to fix Tatum, I tried to fix Colin, I'm a constant fixer. To be with somebody who twists and turns and does everything possible to make sure that you can't fix it, it is such a, it's just, it like robs your soul. Every day I would think, okay, how am I going to make this okay today? And we had separated once, and apparently he was making a case and came back and said he wanted to reconcile, the whole time building a case against me. And really, it took to my second youngest son coming to me and saying, why do you keep going back to this? It's so toxic. And, he's threatened to kill me, he's threatened to kill you. And basically, like, looking me in the eye and saying, I've lost my childhood because of this man. And I don't understand why you keep doing this, for me to almost say, okay, even if I need to keep this together for whatever is driving me, my love for my children needs to be greater. And I just need to get out of this. And that was really the day when I said, I don't care what it takes. I have got to get out of this. And, that was it. Just and I thank him pretty much daily for, saying what I'm sure everyone in my life is thinking, but really drawing the line in the sand and saying, if you won't do it for you, then do it for me.
That's really powerful. And wow, that your son shared that with you. And that's equally as powerful. Were you open to anyone else saying that? Because I feel like in the relationships when sometimes we have that because of intuition that something's not right, we're also not really open to hearing other people say that because it would mean that we have to admit that we screwed up in some way or we should be ashamed or feel guilty in some way. And that is really hard to face. So, were you open at that point to actually making a change?
Not up until he said that to me. No, I did a lot of, it's one of those like, I can badmouth somebody who I love, but I'm just venting. And if somebody else joined in, it's like, hey, like that's my husband. So no, there was always that protective layer. And although I knew what was going on, and I don't think I hid a lot of it, but I also was very honest about it. But I kept, just I really felt like it was my fault. And to speak of what you just said, like if you expose the ugliness of somebody in a relationship, you have to expose yourself. You have to come to the terms with because it always takes two in a relationship. Like I didn't walk away. I did a lot of dumb things. I put my children in a lot of ugly situations that didn't need. So if I were to come forward and say enough is enough, or I've been emotionally abused, first of all, I had to defend it and I was worried people aren't going to believe me. And then secondly, I had to admit that I stayed in it as long as I did, that I did the stupid things that I did. And making it even worse, he was literally taping me, videotaping me. He was sending messages back home to the people that I no longer talk to. He was gathering evidence and texts. And I was playing right into his hands because the more he threatened to leave me or whatever it was, it just kept getting worse and worse. And you know, so when you're stuck in that cycle and someone's telling you it's you and you're behaving in a way that you don't understand, you do think it's got to be me. Like, why am I running? Why am I chasing? Why am I crying? Why am I pushing and pulling? And all of these things, I was like, am I broken? It did something break in me with Colin that I am no longer sane, and I questioned my sanity. Luckily I had seen counselors and I had other professionals who were able to piece it together for me. But yeah, you don't want to hear what other people have to say. And I think that also lends to the uncomfortableness of people in these situations because even, I always say like, even if people had come to me, they had to walk a very fine line in almost trying to like whisper to me, like, well, that doesn't seem right. Because if you push it too far, then that person pushes you out of their lives. Like, well, if you're going to take that stand, then, and they also recognize that they can't talk to you anymore because you're seeing it and they are seeing you. And therefore, you're like, okay, I got to ease up on this one because I don't want them to know the truth. It's so ugly. So, illness and, toxic relationship, they're kind of similar in that nobody knows how to act, towards you. And if they push it too far, they're going to lose you. So they tiptoe around everything and you feel the tiptoeing on the other side of it. So you don't express yourself fully. You only give half truths. You only give half of your feelings and you feel very isolated and alone in it.
It sounds extremely painful what you went through in both relationships and something that I think not many people can directly relate to, but I think we could still be there for someone who is going through an abusive relationship or has had a loss in their lives as well. When you decided to leave that relationship, did you find that people actually judged you, or did you find that they welcomed you back with loving kindness into their lives. And was that maybe a relief, or I'm not sure what happened when you did decide to leave, but what was your experience? And was it as awful as you had maybe thought it would be in your head of making a reason to stay in that relationship because people wouldn't welcome you back? But what happened in the end when you decided to leave?
When I decided to leave, I think I just had to accept that, because one of the hardest parts when you're going through this too is that, you are talking to people in your life that you trust, but you also know that your spouse is talking to people badly about you. And when you realize that, there's an element to you that feels as if you have to tell your side. And it was very important to me, like when I was in the relationship, like to like try and find a way to get to those people to tell them like it's not me. And I think when I was ready to go, I had to say, those people, if they don't want to hear my side of it, if they don't want to accept me back, then they really were not my friends to begin with. And that's a hard reality because they were, lifelong friends. And maybe they would have, maybe they would not have, but I had to decide which parts of it were worth me trying to, put back together. And I think when you think in terms of damage control, that's the worst part. And I think when you're trying to get out of something like that, I think the only thing that you have to focus on is life beyond it. And the past is going to be the past, and whatever happens already happened. You can't change it. You can't go back in time. You can't go before everyone formed their opinion of you. But that's not their opinion of you. That's the opinion of what they believe to be you. And it's not your responsibility to, defend yourself, to make the truth known, to tell your truth. Because if those people are not willing to step forward and, confront me and say, hey, I am worried about you, this does not sound like something you would do, then they weren't worth trying to keep in the end. The people that I really did care about and the people that I thought really deserved, to hear my truth or that I wanted to, I did. And I would say 90% of them never really left. The people that weren't and the people that I decided it was just toxic and time to go, you know, they were my friends when we were great friends, and that was a great friendship. And I would never, regret those days. And I miss some of them very terribly, but I miss the versions of both of us that we were. And we're not those versions anymore. So you just got to let go of feeling as if it's your duty to be on this apology tour, because that's kind of always how it felt. Like, well, if I left, everyone's going to think badly of me. Everyone's going to believe what he had to say. I'm going to have to lose everything and all my friends. But when I got beyond it, I realized they weren't in my life for years anyway. So just like, me wanting this relationship to be something that it was not. I wanted those friendships to be what they were when we were younger, when we were, again, we had lost touch long before any of it fell out anyway. And do I feel badly? Of course. Do I, but you can't stay stuck in something because you're afraid that getting on the other side of it, you're going to lose everything. You, whatever is done is done. You can't go back. You can only move forward. And when you get on the other side of it, the beauty is that I know who my friends are. I trust the people that stayed with me. I know they will be there for through thick and thin. And those friendships to me are so much more golden than whatever I was so worried about losing, and, acquaintances or who I thought were close friends that were no longer there.
Yeah, that's actually really great insight. I feel like, especially if you're really worried about what has already happened, there is nothing you're going to change. So moving forward and finding those ways to reconnect and I feel like in that situation you did the best that you knew how to with what was available to you and with what you knew and trying to keep your family together. So there's nothing to apologize for in those moments. You lived your life as you felt it was to be lived in that moment. So having that feeling to have to apologize or justify what happened, it sounds like that can be very, very draining and just bring this back up and back up and back up every time that you're talking to someone. So letting that go and just letting that be part of the past sounds like it can be a very healing thing, although probably difficult to take those first few steps to do that. But after that, actually finding some healing and then just letting that go with the past. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. Now, do you want to tell us a little bit about your book? Because I'm very curious how that connects up with your two experiences, with the experience that you have had over the decades now, because you started writing that book quite some time ago and it didn't actually make it out into the world until much later than that. So, how does all of that connect together with your book?
So the book really was written. We had four children, like I said at the time, and I was just coming off of the stuff with Tatum. So the first book is really, it started out as I was just, I would talk to nurses, and I would, when I was with chemo at Colin, and I would start telling the story about Tatum, and then I thought, well, I got to write all this down because I'm going to forget everything she's been through, and then it, flowed into Colin. And after I got divorced and started, feeling a little bit more like, okay, it was hard, but I have to make something good come out of this. I reread the book and I remembered my promise, and I thought it is it's very authentic, it's very raw, it's very real. It's not an easy read, but I also hope that people can put themselves into different parts of it and situations, because it goes from, like, meeting Colin in our childhood all the way to him passing. And the people that have read it, I feel like I've touched on something inside of them that's made them feel less alone. Because I think in all of this, the one, theme that I've been hearing most from people that read it is, oh my gosh, I had no idea how lonely you are. And to be honest with you, I didn't know how lonely I was until they read the book. So I think that is why I decided to release it, just because there are so many complex feelings in the situation with caregiving and special needs, and all that goes into that I my hope is that people read it, they will understand that, whatever they're feeling, other people have felt before. The things that you're thinking on your inside voice are natural in unimaginable situations, and stop beating yourself up for them. And then obviously my second book has a different turn to it, because where my first book speaks of the truth and, the courage of my husband and my daughter, who, by the way, is now 24 and doing fabulous. The second book is where that same daughter ends up getting cancer at the age of 13, with something completely unrelated to what she had when she started. And it's also a different feel because the second book goes into a situation that I actually put myself in and made conscious choices to be there. So I hope that the two books, with the third one coming, that kind of unpacks all of it, they're really, my hope is that people read them. It will make them evaluate themselves, maybe give themselves a break and recognize that we're all human. And if you feel sorry for me and them, or if you think, because a lot of people are like, oh, I hope that you're learning to forgive yourself. I hope that in reading them, people can learn to forgive themselves. And, what you said about, like, you make the best decisions with the goodness in your heart and the best of intentions. And it's really easy to look back and say, oh my gosh, why did I do that? And beat yourself up. But you make them out of the goodness of your heart. And even if they don't turn out the way you want them to, that doesn't mean that you made the wrong decision. It just means that you were in an impossible situation, and who knows what the other choice would have been at the time. So that's kind of what all of my writing is about. And my talks is just kind of to, hopefully let people off the hook and tell them, like, give yourself the same grace that you would give to somebody. We're so quick to forgive other people, but so hard on ourselves. And we very rarely see that we, made the same decisions out of love. And to beat yourself up on it or worry about what comes after, again, the past is in the past. There's nothing you can do about it besides heal, forgive, and move forward.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And that is so beautifully put. And your book sounds like a great resource, a companion in people's own lives and journeys and experiences, and also a bit of a guide maybe for them to take a look at what you have gone through and how that relates to their own lives. And will you tell us what the titles are of your books and the one that's coming as well, so that our listeners can find those online if they want to read those?
The first one is called Notes from a Blackberry. The second one is called From Blackberries to Thorns. And the third one is called From Thorns to Blossoms.
Amazing. And you also shared with me that there is a nonprofit involved and also a special project from your daughter that actually funds some of the things that you are doing, including the books as well. Tell us how that all comes together.
The Colin James Barth outreach was the promise that I said that I made to my husband that something good would come out of it. It is an organization that's formed to help women who suddenly find themselves, because I've found myself, in the situation where all of a sudden I'm not only like mom, stay at home, which I've always been, but I'm also caregiver. I'm also breadwinner. So our organization was built around helping the different phases of me as a mom, because when you hit crises like that, it's just really hard as a woman to find support and security without losing everything to get something. So our organization again is evolving, but our main focus right now is to help women personally. If you reach out to me through the organization, to help you find the resources, even if I can't provide the resources at this point, at least I can point you in the right direction. I'm really good at that. My daughter's art is called Hope for Tate, with the number 4. She is a self-taught artist. She's a little person. Like I said, she got cancer when she was 13 and she had her whole left side removed. So between the dwarfism and all the surgeries and, her art is miraculous, and she does it so that to make people happy, and the proceeds from her art go to fund the charity so that we can help other people who have been in the position that we have.
Wow, wonderful. That sounds like such an amazing nonprofit, and the ways that you're reaching out and sharing, and your daughter is sharing her gifts as well with the world to fund that sounds absolutely wonderful. And we, of course, will be linking in our show notes to the foundation, the nonprofit, where our listeners can find the art, and also, of course, your books, which will go to support this venture as well. And I do find that a lot of the times when women are left in the situations where they suddenly become the breadwinner when they have not been before, also in abusive situations, sometimes you get cut off from your finances and you have to leave with nothing, and maybe little children or older children as well, and you don't know where to go or what to do. So having the support, I think, is absolutely invaluable. And do you help women sort of all over the US, or just in a specific state?
No, if you reach out to me via our website, I'm the only one manning it. So it's for people, across the United States, really anyone. Not only can I help you kind of unpack what you need, try to help you find the resources, and hopefully help you help people, monetarily. But I think a good resource, just, sometimes you can't talk to people that you don't want to talk to people. And it's good to take a step out of it and get a third voice that is safe, can give you, guidance as to what to do, ways to protect yourself, what the next steps are, because sometimes that's the hardest part. One is knowing you need help. And secondly is, what help do you even need? How do you even start? Because it's such an overwhelming thing. So again, if you reach out to me via my website, I will do whatever I can to help to find you who you need to be, and maybe to guide you, what your first steps are, just to say, hey, yes, you're right, and you need to do something about this. Or, just to kind of say, I've been there. I won't even give you advice if you don't want, but just to be a sounding ear that is safe, and one that, can help you kind of unpack everything you're going through.
Yeah, and that's what you touched on, the being overwhelmed. I feel like that could be a huge challenge, especially if you're dealing not just emotionally, but also mentally, financially, physically in many situations, or even with the legal system in a lot of these situations, which in itself can be a huge challenge. So it sounds wonderful to have someone to reach out to and actually just talk about that, or even have, a shoulder to cry on if you can't share that with anyone else. So, yeah, thank you. That sounds so wonderful. And as I said, we'll be sure to link all of this in our show notes so that our listeners know how to connect with you. They know where to find you, they know how to reach out. And listeners, if you are in a situation that sounds familiar to what Julie shared with us today in this episode, please, please, please reach out. it can be so isolating, as Julie said, and staying in that situation by yourself and not connecting and not sharing and not reaching out, even if that feels really impossible in the moment. I think it could even prolong what's happening, and it could even push you further into that isolation. So hopefully this is a little spark that says there are people out there that you can connect with. There are people out there that have gone through similar things and that can be a support and a guide and a help when you're experiencing these absolutely horrendous and so much grief and pain in your life. So thank you, Julie, for joining me today. Thank you for taking the time to share your own story with us. I truly appreciate that you have chosen to authentically, vulnerably, and so brave to come on here and share that with others in the hopes of, inspiring, connecting, and healing, and eventually coming to thriving through many of these very difficult situations. Thank you for being here today. I truly, truly appreciate.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And best of luck with the nonprofit and your daughter's art and your books. And we'll do our very best to link everyone up with your adventures. Thank you, Julie, and
Thank you.
take care.
You too.
Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to listen in. If you enjoy the Jōrni Podcast, please support us by subscribing, sharing on social media, and leaving us a review. We appreciate you. And you can find more of The Jōrni on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and our website, thejorni.com. Sending you love and courage, and see you next time.